On the evening of March 29, 1975, a group of teenagers sat in a pizzeria on Wellington Street in Montreal, watching the door. They were waiting for a girl named Sharron Prior. She lived 5 blocks away, and she'd left her house a little after 7. It was a 5-minute walk. She never came through the door. It would take 48 years to find out why, and the answer, when it finally came, would be lifted out of a grave in West Virginia. Pointe-Saint-Charles was the kind of neighborhood where that walk was nothing. Working-class Irish Catholic, squeezed between the rail yards and the Lachine Canal in Montreal's southwest. Families knew each other. Kids moved between houses and corner stores after dark, and nobody thought twice about it. Sharron was 16. She lived on Congregation Street with her mother, Yvonne, and her twin sisters, Doreen and Maureen, 2 years younger. She wanted to be a veterinarian. Family and neighbors described her the same way, then and for the next 5 decades. A kind, warm-hearted girl. That night, when she didn't come home, her mother called the police around 11. The search of the point started in the dark. There was one more thing that happened in the neighborhood that evening, though nobody could weigh it properly at the time. Shortly before Sharron left home, a young woman a few streets over was grabbed at knife point by a stranger. She got away from him. She gave police a description: a tall, heavy-set man, English-speaking, with a mustache. For now, that description just sat in the file. 3 days later, across the St. Lawrence in Longueuil, a beekeeper drove out to a field he kept. He went because someone had told him his gate was standing open, and there wasn't much reason for anyone to be in that field in early spring. He found Sharron there, 9 kilometers from her front door. Whoever had brought her had come by car. There were tire tracks and a footprint pressed deep into the ground, the print of a heavy man. Her jeans lay a few feet from her body, and she had been restrained with a man's blue shirt. The autopsy found she had been beaten and raped, and that she had not died on the night she was taken. She had been alive into Tuesday. Police bagged the shirt and kept it. Remember the shirt? What followed was the part no film can compress honestly. Decades. Police worked through more than 100 men over the years. Every one of them walked out cleared. A tip once led technicians to a garage. The testing came back inconclusive. Reward money went up. Nothing came back for it. Yvonne Prior grew old inside that silence, and she did not move on. The detective who would one day close the file put it simply: she spent her whole life trying to find her daughter's killer. Then, in 2015, the laboratory in Montreal managed something that hadn't been possible in 1975. From the blue shirt, technicians pulled a complete DNA profile of the man who killed Sharron Prior. And it was useless. Not because it was wrong, because there was nothing to compare it to. He wasn't in any database. Police were now holding a perfect description of a man with no way to ask his name. Montreal was not the only city holding a file like that. 500 kilometers down the highway, Toronto had 2. In the summer of 1983, Susan Tice moved into a house on Grace Street near Harvard at the edge of Little Italy. She was 45, a family therapist, a mother of 4, coming out of a separation. She'd driven in from Calgary to start her practice over, and her life with it. She'd been in the house about a month. In the middle of August, the mail started piling up at her door. A relative went to check on her and found her upstairs. She had been raped and stabbed in her own bed. 4 months later, 5 days before Christmas, a 22-year-old named Erin Gilmour closed up the Yorkville boutique where she worked and went upstairs to her apartment in the same building. She was an aspiring designer. She was also the daughter of David Gilmour, one of the founders of Barrick Gold, which made her family one of the wealthiest in the country. None of that reached the men who got in that night. She'd been home perhaps 20 minutes when a friend arrived to pick her up for the evening. The friend found her bound, gagged, raped, and stabbed. Susan Tice and Erin Gilmour had never met. One was a therapist restarting her life in a row house. The other was a designer in Yorkville. Their murders were worked as 2 separate cases because there was nothing on earth to connect them. Hundreds of people were interviewed. Suspects gave blood voluntarily because in 1983, a blood type was the best science available. Nothing held. Both files went cold. Separately. They stayed that way for 17 years until DNA testing grew up. Around the year 2000, scientists ran the preserved evidence from Grace Street and Hazelton Avenue against each other. The same man had killed both women. That changed everything about the story, and nothing about the search. Canada had just opened its national DNA databank, and the profile matched no one in it, because the man had never been convicted of anything. It was Montreal's problem all over again, twice. A complete genetic portrait of a killer, and no name to put under it. The thing that finally broke all 3 cases open happened in California. And it wasn't a confession or a witness. In April 2018, investigators arrested the Golden State Killer by taking his old crime scene DNA and uploading it to a public genealogy site, the kind of site people use to find their grandparents. It found his cousins instead. From those distant matches, investigators built a family tree, and the tree narrowed to him. The lesson traveled fast through every cold case unit on the continent. You no longer needed the killer's DNA on file. You needed a relative, any relative, who'd once been curious about their ancestry. Toronto moved first. The cold case unit sent its 1983 evidence to a laboratory in Texas that specializes in reading old, degraded samples, and detectives started building trees. By 2021, the branches had narrowed to a single family from Northern Ontario, 5 brothers. Police cleared them with DNA, one at a time, until one was left. Moosonee sits on the Moose River near James Bay. There's no road to it. You come in by air or on a train called the Polar Bear Express. In November 2022, officers arrived there with a warrant and took a blood sample from Joseph George Sutherland, 61 years old. He'd worked at a bank. He'd been married, raised a son. Neighbors knew him for canoeing and hunting. He had no criminal record. Not in 1983, not since, not anywhere. His blood matched both crime scenes. Detective Sergeant Steve Smith, who led the effort, said it flatly. If we hadn't utilized this technology, we never would have came to his name. Erin Gilmour's brother had his own word for what the technology found. For 40 years, he said, this man had been a ghost. Montreal was 6 months behind Toronto, working the same method on an older wound. In December 2021, the Prior file changed hands one more time to a Longueuil detective named Eric Racicot. He was the 14th investigator to hold it. He sent the blue shirt back to the laboratory, and this time, the science had caught up to it. A full profile. And then one step further, the lab read the Y chromosome, the piece of DNA a father hands to his son, the piece that follows his surname. An American database answered with a name. Not a man's name, a family's. Romine, West Virginia. 4 brothers. Two of the brothers were still living. Noah and Michael Romine agreed to give their DNA voluntarily. The numbers came back later in a court filing. The profile from Sharron's shirt was 140 million times more likely to come from a brother of theirs than from anyone else. That left the brother who couldn't be asked. Franklin Maywood Romine had been dead for 40 years. He was born in 1946 in Huntington, West Virginia, and his record starts as a young man. Prison escapes in the 60s, parole in 1973. In 1974, he broke into a house in Parkersburg and raped a woman. He made bond, and then he ran, north across the border to Montreal. He was living there in the spring of 1975, a tall, heavy-set, English-speaking man with a mustache. The same description a frightened young woman gave police on Wellington Street the night Sharron vanished. Nobody put the two together. 7 months after the murder, Montreal police did arrest him on the West Virginia warrant for the Parkersburg case. He was extradited, served his time, drifted back to Montreal, and died there in 1982. He was 36. No cause of death was ever published. His family buried him back home in Putnam County, West Virginia. And for 41 years, that was the end of the story. In the spring of 2023, a West Virginia judge granted a request from Quebec to open that grave. Romine's surviving family fought the order on religious grounds. The judge ruled against them. So, on the morning of May 2, 2023, with state police, FBI agents, and detectives who had driven 1,000 kilometers from Longueuil, standing in a small cemetery in Fraser Bottom, Franklin Romine came out of the ground. Tissue from his remains went back to the laboratory in Montreal and was set against the DNA from the blue shirt. The match came back 100%. On May 23rd, police in Longueuil announced that the murder of Sharron Prior was solved. In the front row sat her mother, Yvonne. She was 85. She had been waiting since the night she picked up the phone at 11 o'clock, 48 years before. Sharron's twin sisters spoke that day. Doreen said solving the case would never bring her sister back, but that knowing her killer is no longer on this earth and won't kill anymore brought the family somewhat of closure. Maureen spoke to Sharron directly. "You may never have come back to our house or Congregation Street that weekend, but you have never left our hearts, and you never will." There was no arrest to make and no trial to hold. What the family got was an answer. Toronto got the other kind of ending. In October 2023, Joseph Sutherland pleaded guilty to 2 counts of second-degree murder. Through his lawyers, he said his mind had erased the killings, a claim the sentencing judge said she gave little weight. Susan Tice's son stood in court and told him, "You murdered and assaulted 2 wonderful women and went on to live your life." Sutherland, for his part, told the court, "The things I have done broke me." In March 2024, he was sentenced to life, with no chance of parole for 21 years. Erin's father, David Gilmour, had lived long enough to see the arrest. He died the following June at 91, before the plea and before the sentence. Investigators are not finished with either man. West Virginia wants Romine's timeline checked against a rape and murder in Wheeling and against a young woman who disappeared in Mason County, her wallet found on a riverbank. His profile now sits in the American National DNA Index. In Toronto, police have said they're checking Sutherland against other unsolved files. So far, nothing else has matched. 3 names came back out of all of it: Sharron Prior, Susan Tice, Erin Gilmour. If you know anything about the movements of Franklin Romine between 1967 and 1982 in West Virginia or in Quebec, The Putnam County Prosecutor's Office and the Longueuil Police want to hear from you. Anything connected to unsolved attacks on women in Toronto in the early 1980s goes to the Toronto Police Cold Case Unit, or anonymously to Crime Stoppers, at 1-800-222-8477.